Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the eerie, bone-dry silence that followed the supposed death of one of the most enigmatic cartel figures in modern Mexico, Heriberto Lazcano, better known as El Lazca. Picture this: a coffin under military guard, no family, no press, and a body mysteriously snatched from the funeral home hours after arrival. Strange? Absolutely. But it gets stranger. You're about to follow the footsteps of a ghost, a man trained by elite forces, turned warlord, and then erased like a smudge from a mirror. He moved like fog, seen, felt, but never held. His enemies feared his name more than his face, and even allies whispered about him like he could hear through walls. Some say he's dead. Some swear he walks among us. You probably won't survive 5 minutes in his world without turning into a rumor yourself. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is in your corner of the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun dips low over Sabinas, Coahuila, casting peach-colored shadows over the cracked walls of the small funeral home. It's October 2012, and 2 plain coffins sit in the chilled back room. One of them is said to contain the body of Heriberto Lazcano. Not confirmed, just said. Officials are nervous. There's no fanfare, no priest, no press, just soldiers, lots of them, and a few funeral home attendants who can't quite meet each other's eyes. The air smells like lemon disinfectant and overcooked coffee. That's about all that's real. A man enters, checks the ID on the toe tag and signs off. But the dental records? Never taken. Photographs? Blurry. Autopsy? Rushed. And that night, before the body could be officially verified, it vanishes. Not metaphorically. The coffin is stolen, lifted right out of the funeral home by gunmen who arrive silently and leave even quieter. Locals wake the next day to the news. Heriberto Lazcano, the feared Zeta boss, is dead. Or was. Or maybe still is. Officials scramble for a press release. There are statements from the Navy. Something about a shootout in Progreso. They claim they found his corpse after a firefight. But already, conspiracy blooms like mold in a damp cellar. If this was truly him, why the secrecy? Why the immediate disappearance of the body? And why no family? The man was supposed to be one of the most powerful drug lords in Mexico. Surely someone would show up, but no one does. In sleepy border towns, whispers start. Did he fake it? Was it staged? Many people still think that the whole thing was a distraction, that Lazcano's final vanishing act was actually a military-sponsored ghosting, because Heriberto was always more myth than man. Some call him a butcher, others a strategist, but nearly all who crossed his path, those who lived to tell it, spoke of his discipline, his silence, the way he seemed to move between rooms without opening a door. In the cartel world, he wasn't the loudest or the flashiest. No gold chains, no Instagram girls, just cold precision and a quiet that filled rooms with dread. Back at the funeral home, investigators gather around the now empty slab. One lights a cigarette with a shaky hand. He's been here before, covered too many of these cartel deaths to be easily spooked. But this feels different. This feels like a message, a performance, written for an audience that's too afraid to clap. Do you remember the day he left with the first money? We'll get there. But first, rewind the clock. Before the ghost. Before the myth. Back to the dust. Sabinas in the 1970s is the kind of place that doesn't dream much. The roads are dry and cracked, the shops close early, and the air smells like coal and rust. That's where Heriberto Lazcano is born, likely sometime in 1974, though even that's debated. His early life is unremarkable. One of 7 kids in a working-class home. His father sells produce, his mother knits. But there's something in the boy's gaze, even then. Not ambition, something colder, calculated. He keeps to himself, never much of a talker, and never the kid to start fights, just the one who finishes them quickly. His teachers recall him as punctual, polite, and forgettable. A ghost in training. When he turns 17, he doesn't hang around. There's no future in Sabinas unless you want to rot in the sun. So he signs up for the Mexican army. No ceremony. No grand farewell. Just a bus ticket, a folded blanket, and a promise that sounds more like a threat. Don't come back until you're someone. And he listens. In the military, Lazcano finds the structure he craved. Wake-up bells, weapon drills, marches that wear down the soul until silence is a comfort. And he adapts quickly. Too quickly, some say. Within a year, he's selected for elite training under the GAF, Grupo Aeromóvil de Fuerzas Especiales, Mexico's special forces. These aren't ordinary soldiers. These are the ones who train in the jungle, who study counterinsurgency, who learn how to make a man vanish without a sound. It's here, in the heart of camouflage and command, that Lazcano begins to build his legend, not with violence, but with obedience. While others brag in posture, he listens, he studies, he watches. He's learning how the world works, not from a textbook, but from the inside of systems designed to never be questioned. And once he understands them, he starts looking for ways to break them, because Lazcano isn't interested in medals or honor. He's interested in what happens when power operates without consequence. And that lesson, as you'll see, never leaves him. There's a myth among the older officers in the GAF ranks that some men don't get trained, they get revealed. Lazcano, it seems, was one of those men. He didn't excel at anything flashy. He wasn't the fastest or the strongest. But he absorbed knowledge like concrete soaks in oil, quiet, dark, permanent. In early reports, fellow recruits describe him as the one who never asked questions, but always had answers when it mattered. When someone went missing during a jungle training op, it was Lazcano who found their compass tucked behind a log. Not because he cared, but because he noticed the drop in footprints, the unusual turn of the ferns. Details. Always the details. By the late 1990s, Lazcano has seen a lot. Not all of it was part of the curriculum. The Mexican military, especially the special forces units, had become entangled in the war on drugs in complicated ways. One day, they're executing search operations against cartels. The next, they're watching local commanders accept gifts from those same traffickers. The lines blur, the orders grow murky. And in the middle of it, men like Lazcano learn to operate in gray zones. It's not long before he sees a more profitable path. Word spreads among the ranks, quietly, carefully, that there are side opportunities. Jobs that come with unmarked envelopes and armored SUVs. A few of Lazcano's GAF colleagues defect and join private security firms, but some go even further. They join the Gulf Cartel. It's around this time that Lazcano begins to vanish for short stretches. Weekend leaves become week-long absences. He returns with new boots, clean bills, and once, a watch so expensive his sergeant asks no questions at all. The real pivot, though, comes in 1998. That's when the Gulf Cartel, under the leadership of Ociel Cardenas Guillen, decides it needs more than street soldiers. It needs discipline, intelligence, tactical execution. So they create something new, a private paramilitary wing made up of former GAFE soldiers. It's called Los Zetas, after the radio code for high-ranking officers, and at the heart of its formation, Heriberto Lazcano. He doesn't leave the army in disgrace. He doesn't leave in protest. He simply transfers, quietly, no press release. One day he's in uniform. The next, he's a ghost with a rifle, reporting to a cartel don instead of a general. If you're picturing a dramatic exit from the base, think again. Lazcano likely walked out through the front gates with his duffel bag and ID card still in his pocket. That's how clean the transition was. Once inside the cartel's inner circle, he helps shape Los Zetas into something terrifying. They're not just muscle. They're tacticians, operatives, men who know how to ambush convoys, wiretap communications, and stage fake checkpoints. The old cartels were chaotic, brutal, but uncoordinated. Los Zetas, they move like a swarm with a playbook, and Lazcano is soon writing the plays. The Gulf Cartel loves the results. Kidnappings become surgical. Hits are conducted without noise. Corruption runs deeper because the Zetas don't just bribe, they infiltrate. They speak the language of government. They understand maps, psychology, weapon systems. It's organized crime, militarized. Meanwhile, Lazcano keeps a low profile. Unlike other cartel figures, he avoids flamboyance. No flashy cars, no public stunts. He lets the rumors do the work. And oh, do the rumors work hard. There's talk of a training camp deep in Tamaulipas where new Zetas run drills with AKs and machetes. No one's seen Lazcano there, but everyone knows the quiet man designed the program. Some say he teaches classes in ghost tactics, how to slip through towns without leaving footprints, how to disappear into noise. The U.S. starts to take notice. By the early 2000s, the DEA has a file on him. Not thick, just precise. Because there's not much to pin. He leaves no photos, no fingerprints, just patterns. Arrests that never happen. Informants who go silent. And towns that fall under Zeta control without a single headline. Back in Coahuila, no one really remembers the kid who used to sweep his father's store. But in border towns, his name is said like a prayer or a warning. He's known as El Verdugo, the executioner, not because he's seen doing it, but because when someone disappears, they say, it must have been Lazcano. He develops a reputation for eliminating not just rivals, but inefficiency. A lieutenant who disobeys disappears. A local who talks, gone. Even among the Zetas, fear of Lazcano becomes institutional. Still, he keeps his routines. One of the few verifiable facts from this time, he's a creature of control, always punctual. Meals at the same hour. Boots cleaned daily. He once ordered an entire warehouse repainted because the shade of gray was too reflective. And it works. Los Zetas flourish. By 2005, they're not just enforcing for the Gulf Cartel, they're challenging them. The student has outgrown the master, which leads to a shift. Lazcano doesn't just want to run security, he wants autonomy. He begins pulling away, not publicly, but tactically. Quiet coups, silent funding moves, and new command structures that answer only to him. And this is where the beginning of the end starts. But we're not there yet. Tonight, you're still in the build. The early chapters. The part where power sharpens like a knife and smiles without showing teeth. Many people still think that Los Zetas were always chaotic. But what if the chaos was the design? What if Lazcano, in all his silence, wanted the noise outside to distract from the system within? So what do you think? In the hierarchy of fear, silence always outranks shouting. Lazcano never needed to raise his voice, never needed theatrics. When his name moved through radio chatter or passed between lips in prison yards, it did so in a hush, like it might overhear itself and respond. By 2006, the world outside was starting to catch on. News outlets referred to him as a mystery general, or the invisible hand behind the most disciplined violence Mexico had ever seen. Inside Los Zetas, there was no mystery, just protocol. And that protocol had Lazcano's fingerprints all over it. You could spot his style from a distance. Attacks that unfolded like rehearsals. Houses left spotless after raids. Corpses lined with precise symmetry. He didn't believe in mess. Not because of ethics, but because mess created questions. Lazcano's greatest fear wasn't being caught. It was being misunderstood. His soldiers knew the rules. Punctuality, loyalty, efficiency, deviate, and disappear. Most of them never even met him. Orders filtered through layers, like whispers traveling through a cathedral of shadow. He was the ghost in the ceiling, and yet, in the few first-hand accounts that survive, one detail recurs. He always looked like he had just stepped out of a barracks. Crisp shirt, trimmed hair, a presence you'd salute, even if you didn't know why. One former operative, now in witness protection, once said, "He looked at you like a filing cabinet. If he needed what you knew, you were opened. If not, you were ignored." Heriberto Lazcano wasn't in it for the fame, or even the money, not directly. He was in it for the machine, the structure. He once told a subordinate during a whispered meeting in a Veracruz safe house, "Cartels fail because they want to be kings. I want to be the law," and he nearly was. But the military training that had forged him was also what gave him away. Not to the authorities, but to fate. Because control, once tasted, becomes addiction. Lazcano began shaping the Zetas into his image. Gone were the chaotic brutes of early cartel years. In came formations, encrypted radios, and ranks with codes instead of names. The Zetas stopped being just a gang. They became a corporation of dread, and the violence followed. In 2008, the city of Reynosa fell into chaos. Not because of a drug war, but because Lazcano wanted it as a message. One night, streetlights blacked out across 5 neighborhoods. By dawn, 19 bodies lay across intersections. No gunshots had been heard, no sirens, just silence and death arranged with ceremonial precision. Authorities didn't find shell casings. They found a note, not handwritten, typed, sealed in a plastic sleeve, weatherproofed. It read, "We arrived at 200. We left at 2:16. Z." Many people still think that this was overkill, but some scholars argue it was doctrine. Lazcano believed fear should never feel like panic. It should feel like inevitability. And still, he remained invisible. Even in photos, he's like a recurring error, blurred, back-turned. In one grainy image from a 2009 surveillance tape in Matamoros, he stands at a distance from a meeting of lieutenants, unarmed, unbothered. He doesn't speak, just observes. A priest presiding over ritual violence. During this time, DEA intel grows increasingly anxious. Internal memos refer to Lazcano not just as a cartel boss, but as a command structure in human form. They recognize what's happening. He's not creating turf wars. He's preparing an army. And armies don't retire. Back in Coahuila, his hometown grows quieter. Locals avoid mentioning him, even fondly. A teacher from his old primary school reportedly burned all records with his name, saying only, "He was too quiet." The silence stuck to your skin. Yet Lazcano, according to those closest to him, was never erratic. He had habits. One of them was books, military theory, history, tactics from Alexander the Great to Vietnam-era manuals. In one safe house, federal agents later found a heavily underlined Spanish copy of Sun Tzu's Art of War, with margin notes. One reads simply, "Don't let them fight, let them fold." Let's pause there gently. Imagine for a second a man who builds a cartel not to express power, but to replicate the very institution that trained him. Imagine he doesn't want to be loved or even feared, just obeyed. Completely. Without question. Without echo. That's what the Zetas became under him. So why then did it begin to crack? Simple. Kings don't like sharing. Ociel Cardenas, the Gulf cartel's ruling don, had once welcomed the Zetas as a blade. Now they'd become a sword too sharp to hold. Tensions rose. Lazcano began drawing lines, subtle at first. Fewer meetings, delayed responses, requests denied. And then, in 2010, it snapped. The Zetas officially split from the Gulf cartel. It wasn't a bloody divorce. It was a surgical one. Border towns were divided, revenue streams rerouted. Lazcano ordered entire territories sealed off, as if drawing military boundaries. Those who crossed without clearance disappeared. No warning, no message, just void. Many people still think the split was inevitable, but others believe it was strategic, that Lazcano wanted independence all along, and that he used the Gulf cartel's infrastructure until the Zetas could stand alone. Now, fully autonomous, he had what he'd wanted all along: command. But with command came visibility. And that's when the ghosts started flickering in and out of the light. In a declassified memo from the Mexican Navy, a curious sentence appears. He no longer moves. He signals. Think about that. He no longer moves. He signals. Movement attracts attention. But signaling? That's something else. That's what generals do when they're done walking. They raise fingers, nod once, press a button, and miles away, things explode. By 2011, Heriberto Lazcano isn't walking border towns anymore. He isn't supervising training drills or dining with lieutenants. He's somewhere else, always somewhere else. His lieutenants refer to him in code, sometimes as L40, sometimes as Padre, and sometimes simply as La Señal, the signal. He's reduced himself to abstraction, like a ghost in a machine. And the machine, it keeps running. Los Zetas, fully split from the Gulf cartel, are now a force of their own. But not a cartel in the classic sense. They're scattered, fluid, less like a pyramid, more like a nervous system. Cells operating across Mexico and Central America, often without direct oversight, but still following the same structure, still quoting him, still leaving bodies in rows, always aligned east to west, as if guided by some unseen compass. One lieutenant once said, "If you stray, even a little, you don't get a warning. You just stop existing." And the command? It never yells. It's a whisper over radio, a sentence embedded in a grocery delivery, a red mark on the corner of a newspaper page. That's all it takes. Many people still think that Lazcano's greatest power was violence. But those who watched him closely say it was distance. He had learned that being close meant being known, and being known meant being dead, so he started receding. The last confirmed sighting comes in early 2012. A grainy drone image from above a compound in northern Zacatecas. A tall man, hands behind his back, pacing a rooftop in perfect 20-step intervals. No facial ID, no follow-up. But military analysts note one thing. The man doesn't flinch when a chopper flies nearby, doesn't look up, doesn't react, just continues pacing. Exactly 20 steps. Like a drill. Then he's gone. From that moment on, Lazcano becomes an absence. His name still circulates, on intercepted calls, in seized ledgers, on whispered lips in prison cells. But no one sees him. No one records him. It's as if the ghost finally let go of the body. And yet, the orders keep coming. That same year, a town in Veracruz sees 35 bodies dumped in broad daylight. No ransom, no messages, just a mass silence louder than any siren. Local officials claim a rival group did it. But the method, the plastic restraints, the binding technique, the geometry of the scene, it all points to Zeta protocol, Lazcano's signature without the ink. In Tamaulipas, residents report seeing soldiers who aren't soldiers, patrolling in unmarked trucks, radios whispering in unison. They don't ask questions. They just walk the perimeter, count doorways, then vanish into the scrubland. By mid-2012, journalists begin asking the same question: where is Heriberto Lazcano? The government's answer: we're close. And then one day in October, just like that, he's dead. At least that's the story. According to official reports, a Navy unit engaged in a firefight with Zeta members in the town of Progreso, Coahuila. 2 men were killed. One of them, they claimed, matched Lazcano's description. Tall, light-skinned, military haircut. A thumbprint was taken, matched to an old Army ID. The body was taken to a funeral home for processing. Within 12 hours it was gone, stolen, just vanished. Now pause, let's slow this down. We're talking about the most wanted man in Mexico, a former elite soldier, the head of a transnational cartel, allegedly killed in combat. No press conference, no photographs, no family statements. And then, his corpse is removed by armed men in the dead of night. No arrests, no suspects, no follow-up, just silence. A few weeks later, a blurry photo surfaces, said to be taken minutes before the funeral home theft. It shows a pale face, eyes closed, a hint of a scar on the cheek. But experts question its authenticity. The lighting is off, the skin tone inconsistent with earlier reports. And most damning of all, no dental records were ever confirmed. The one surefire way to ID him, never used. And yet the government insists he's dead. But many people still think that the body wasn't his, that it was a double, a decoy, a final misdirection from the man who spent his whole life turning presence into rumor. After the alleged death, the Zetas fracture. Not immediately, but gradually. Without Lazcano's signals, lieutenants start interpreting doctrine differently. Some remain loyal to the code. Others break off, forming splinter groups with names like Zeta Nueva or Z50. The violence becomes more random, less elegant, more desperate. The silence breaks into static, but Lazcano, he never speaks again. Or does he? Because months later, in an encrypted transmission intercepted near Monterrey, a voice is recorded giving commands with clipped military phrasing. No name, no visual, just audio. Analysts claim the cadence matches known recordings of Lazcano from 5 years earlier. Could be a mimic, could be a trick, or maybe, just maybe, the ghost isn't gone. In Saltillo, a luxury home is discovered with no occupant but fresh groceries in the fridge. The place is spotless, no dust, military books on the shelf, surveillance feeds running in every room. On the kitchen table, a list of supplies, no fingerprints, just a handwriting match to a note recovered years earlier in a Zeta camp. And still, the official record stays unchanged. Heriberto Lazcano, deceased October 2012. The file is closed. But the shadow? Still walking. And the question remains, why fake your death if you've already won? Unless winning was never the point. Unless silence itself was the throne he wanted. So what do you think? There's something poetic about a man who spends his whole life preparing for vanishment. Not escape. Vanishment. The difference matters. Escape implies a chase, a fear, a breaking of bonds. Vanishment, though? That's art. That's folding into the background so flawlessly the world forgets you were ever in focus. And that's exactly what Heriberto Lazcano seemed to master. After the October 2012 incident, officials closed the books fast. Too fast. Reporters were given a press release, a vague photo, and no chance to verify anything. The funeral home theft, labeled an unfortunate criminal disruption. But off the record, whispers spiraled out like cracks in glass. At the heart of them, the question everyone wanted to ask but didn't dare. Did he do it? Did he plan his own death? Let's back up just a bit. Months before the alleged shootout in Progreso, strange things started happening inside Los Zetas. Mid-level lieutenants were rotated out of key positions, reassigned to distant regions with no explanation. Communication structures changed. Messages once relayed through 3 channels were suddenly bouncing through 6. Security protocols tripled. Surveillance increased. Some thought it was just Lazcano tightening the screws, but others, those who'd been with him since the beginning, felt something different. They called it La Retirada Silenciosa, the silent retreat. He stopped attending internal meetings entirely. No more voice notes, no more satellite calls, just directives, passed from hand to hand, each one written with that unmistakable tight military shorthand only he used. Abbreviated, clean, no wasted ink. Even his most trusted commanders didn't know where he was, but the orders kept coming, precise, unmistakable. And then, one final command, a strategic consolidation of Zeta assets in Coahuila, including the shipment of specific personnel and equipment to Progreso, the very town where he would later be killed. Coincidence? Many people still think so, but let's add one more ingredient. In the weeks leading up to the incident, 3 known Lazcano lookalikes, low-ranking Zetas with vaguely similar builds and facial features, disappeared from prison. Quiet transfers. 2 were due for release, 1 for interrogation. All gone. All unaccounted for. Now imagine this. A military-trained man obsessed with control, with a network of operatives and loyalists, decides he no longer wants the throne. Maybe because it's too hot. Maybe because it never mattered to him in the first place. So, what does he do? He scripts his own erasure. He knows how to handle identity. He understands dental records, radio silence, and the way the press operates. He plants the double. Lets the story unfold. Stages the vanishing with precision, and then slips into the folds of the world like smoke under a door. Back in Progreso, after the supposed shootout, there were irregularities. The Navy's report lacked timestamps. Civilian witnesses described hearing gunfire, but none saw a body. The funeral home staff were replaced within 48 hours. And most curious of all, not a single member of Lazcano's family came forward to claim the body. No brother, no cousin, no old friend. Only one anonymous flower arrangement arrived at the funeral home hours before the body vanished. It read, "Gracias por todo, jefe." Thanks for everything, boss. It's the kind of message that could mean anything or everything. In the cartel world, tribute is currency. But this wasn't a tribute. It was closure. Quiet, final, and very possibly orchestrated by the man himself. After that, stories spread like mist. A rancher outside Monclova claimed he saw a man who looked just like Lazcano purchasing veterinary supplies in flawless rural slang. A woman in Monterey swore she saw him lighting candles in an empty chapel, wearing a mechanic's jumpsuit and dark glasses. A bartender in Guatemala spoke of a regular who tipped in exact change and always sat facing the door. Military posture, kind eyes, but never smiled. No proof, no photos, just fragments. But they all carried the same echo. He was quiet. He looked like a man who had given something up. Not lost it, given it up, on purpose. Which brings us back to why. Why would someone like Heriberto Lazcano walk away? He had everything. Power, money, soldiers who would die for him. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe the plan was never to build a throne, but a system. One that could operate without him. One that could obey without emotion. Maybe he believed he'd done enough. One former Zeta commander, now in hiding, put it like this. He wasn't like the others. He didn't need to be seen. He needed to be obeyed. And once that was done, he had nothing left to prove. Some claim he fled to South America. Others think he's dead after all, killed earlier. And the decoy story was just the government buying time. And then there are those who think he's still issuing orders, that somewhere in the dry hills of Coahuila, behind a gated estate with no name, a man sits in silence, radio by his side, waiting for a world that still moves to his quiet signal. So what do you think? If he's alive, he's the greatest vanisher Mexico has ever produced. If he's dead, he may still be more present than most of the living. By the time Heriberto Lazcano was declared dead, the story had already outrun itself. Officials were playing catch-up, press releases were being retracted and rewritten, and the funeral home had become a symbol, less a place of death and more a stage for something far stranger. But if you want to understand how a man becomes a ghost with operational authority, you need to rewind even further, to the birth of Los Zetas not as soldiers, but as an idea, a philosophy. Because here's the truth that makes people uncomfortable. Lazcano wasn't just building a cartel. He was drafting a doctrine. Back in the early 2000s, when most criminal groups still relied on family ties and loose alliances, Lazcano approached things with military clarity. He recruited like a general, not for loyalty, not for charisma, but for efficiency. Ex-military, ex-police, demobilized commandos, men with training, muscle memory, and a tolerance for orders without questions. His early recruits weren't chosen because they could shoot. They were chosen because they could wait. He believed patience was deadlier than firepower. Zeta training camps started appearing in rural Tamaulipas and northern Veracruz. The locals called them ranchos fantasmas, ghost ranches, places where strange men arrived at night and left at dawn. No parties, no music, just exercises, drills, coded calls, and endless repetition. One escaped trainee later described the days there as rhythm without rest. He said they ate at 0600, trained until 1800, and read military manuals at night. If you failed a physical, you were sent home blindfolded. If you failed an order, you didn't get sent home at all. In one of the camps, a concrete wall bore a simple phrase, stenciled in black paint, Silencio es fuerza. Silence is strength. That was Lazcano's mantra. Not shouted from podiums, but carved into minds. He discouraged the usual cartel vanity. No gold chains, no tattoos, no flashy guns. If your boots weren't polished, you weren't allowed into command briefings. If your rifle jammed, you scrubbed toilets. He was building more than muscle. He was building behavior, and it worked. From 2005 to 2010, the Zetas expanded faster than any cartel before them. not just in size, but in presence, not always visible, but unmistakably felt. They weren't just in the drug trade. They were in extortion, kidnapping, fuel theft, illegal logging, and even cargo protection. If it moved in Mexico and made money, a Zeta had probably counted it, taxed it, or buried someone over it. Lazcano watched it all without stepping forward. One curious detail. During this time, he was rarely photographed, even internally. His face circulated mostly through artist sketches or grainy surveillance images. But every so often, a new recruit would describe meeting a tall man who listened more than he spoke. One of them said, "He looked like someone who knew your secrets before you spoke them." And yet, even as his network grew, Lazcano became harder to find. His methods for communication shifted constantly. Early on, he'd use burner phones or relayed radio signals. Later, it was through coded books. Yes, books. Zeta couriers carried copies of military novels with specific pages dog-eared. Orders were written in the margins, decoded by those who knew what to look for. Still, he never stayed in one place too long. He'd arrive quietly, sleep no more than a few hours, and leave before sunrise. No photos, no toasts, no drama. It became a running joke among his inner circle that if you shook Lazcano's hand, you'd never do it again. Not because you'd be punished, but because he'd already be gone. One particularly revealing story comes from a former lieutenant in Chiapas. He claimed that during a moment of rare calm, Lazcano once shared a homemade dinner with his men. No guards, no orders, just food and silence. The meal? White rice, fried plantains, black beans. Simple, almost monastic. At the end, Lazcano stood and said, "Control is not in bullets. It is in pauses." Then he walked out into the night without a word. Many people still think his style made him vulnerable, that his absence created power vacuums. But others argue the opposite. His very lack of presence forced loyalty. Without a face to fixate on, his soldiers followed a structure, not a personality, a system, one he'd engineered so deeply it could run without his voice. But silence doesn't last forever. By 2010, cracks started forming, not in the Zeta infrastructure, but in Mexico itself. Federal authorities were no longer content to pretend these cartels were isolated. Pressure from the U.S. increased. The DEA began offering millions for Lazcano's capture, and someone somewhere got too close. Reports surfaced of 2 assassination attempts, one near Torreon, one in Durango. Both failed, but both showed something unnerving. Someone had intel. Someone was tracking the ghost. And that's when Lazcano began disappearing on purpose. He no longer stayed anywhere for more than a few hours. He no longer traveled with guards. In fact, he started traveling alone, dressed as a trucker, or a priest, or a mechanic. No pattern, no profile. One security analyst later said, he wasn't running, he was rehearsing, preparing for the moment when disappearance wasn't just a tactic, it was the plan. So what do you think? When a man spends years teaching others how to disappear, what does it look like when he finally uses the lesson himself? It's a strange feeling, isn't it? Knowing someone's out there, not hiding in a cave, not holed up in some mountain stronghold, but moving among the living, unseen. A man trained to vanish not by running, but by blending in so perfectly that he no longer registers as a threat or a target. That's where Heriberto Lazcano found himself by late 2010. He wasn't cornered. He wasn't even particularly hunted. Not in the way Hollywood imagines. No SWAT teams busting down doors. No frantic helicopter pursuits. The reality was subtler and far more dangerous. He was being watched, and that, for a man who once commanded the shadows, was intolerable, so he slipped even deeper into the folds. Let's talk about that shift, because it's important. At this point, Lazcano had everything a cartel boss could want: money, power, loyalty, but none of it made him more visible. In fact, the more control he amassed, the less trace he left. The usual signs: mansions, women, photo ops, extravagant gifts, none of it applied. In cities where other capos threw parties, Lazcano set up dead zones, areas with no radio signals, no chatter, no movement. If you saw headlights coming your way in one of those zones, you simply turned around. He was no longer building just an organization. He was building an absence. One security expert from the Mexican Navy, who'd been part of the task force assigned to his file, later said, "It wasn't that we couldn't find him. It was that we weren't sure he ever stayed in one place long enough to be found." It felt inhuman. Inhuman or not, Lazcano was still operating. Evidence of his hand could be seen in operations stretching across half of Mexico. Zeta cells in Tabasco, Veracruz, Tamaulipas, San Luis Potosí, all moving in eerie synchronicity. Same patterns, same tactics, same ghostly timing. One signature maneuver began popping up in reports. Urban seizures completed in under 15 minutes. Entire neighborhoods locked down with vehicles, scouts on rooftops, and exits sealed. All without firing a single shot. It was militarized silence, and it carried Lazcano's scent. In late 2011, a curious event occurred in Nuevo Laredo. Federal forces intercepted a convoy believed to be transporting a high-level Zeta commander. They deployed in full force: air support, roadblocks, thermal imaging. The convoy was real. The cargo was real. But when the trucks were stopped and opened, they were empty. Not empty as in decoys, empty as in scrubbed. No fingerprints, no signs of occupancy. Freshly cleaned interiors, still warm engines. They'd been driven to the ambush point, stopped, and abandoned minutes before the feds arrived. Was Lazcano in one of those trucks? No one knows. But the timing, the choreography, it fit him. Because by then, he was playing chess with satellites, not soldiers. Even the DEA began adjusting their language. Internally, they stopped calling him a target. They started calling him a theory. In that same year, rumors began surfacing about Lazcano's increasingly spiritual side. Not spiritual in the traditional sense. He wasn't known to attend mass or quote scripture, but symbolic. He became obsessed with ritual. Captured Zeta members spoke of coded gestures, the way meeting rooms had to be set up a certain way, food arranged in left-to-right symmetry, messages signed with military-style date stamps instead of names. In one abandoned safe house, agents found a small private chapel built into the basement. Not lavish, simple, white candles, a steel crucifix, and beside it, a journal with short entries, almost liturgical. One page read, "Lead with quiet, win with waiting." Another, "When you vanish, do not return." It's moments like these that make you wonder, was Lazcano still building an empire? Or had he already begun dismantling himself? Many people still think he was losing control of the Zetas during this time, that his silence signaled weakness. But others argue the opposite, that his distance was design, that he believed the truest form of leadership wasn't presence, it was imprint. In his absence, factions still followed his rules. Operations continued with chilling regularity. Discipline didn't collapse. It adapted, and yet, even in this meticulously orchestrated vanishing, he left behind the occasional crack. Take, for example, the incident in San Fernando in 2011, a massacre. Nearly 200 bodies discovered in mass graves, migrants mostly, executed and buried by local Zeta cells. The government reeled. Media frenzy, And for the first time, Lazcano's name appeared in public discourse with venom. He was no longer just the ghost. He was the mastermind. But the method? It was messy, undisciplined, loud. It wasn't his style. Analysts noted the departure from Zeta norms, the chaos, the visible panic, the lack of coordination. And that's when a theory emerged. Lazcano wasn't slipping. He was stepping back, on purpose. Because when leaders lose grip, their system stumbles. But when Lazcano faded, the system spiked, as if trying to shout louder in his absence. Still, the myth endured. For every mess left behind, another clean operation appeared. For every rogue lieutenant making headlines, another silent cell seized an oil pipeline without a sound. He was becoming less of a person and more of a force, like gravity, felt, not seen, feared, not heard. And in the end, isn't that what he wanted? So what do you think? Can a man disappear so completely that even his mistakes look like someone else's? Imagine walking through a town where nothing looks out of place. Cars parked neatly, dogs sleeping under shade trees, kids kicking a soccer ball on dusty pavement. Now imagine every window is watching you. Every shopkeeper knows your name without saying it. And every movement you make is being silently logged for someone who hasn't been seen in years. That's what parts of northern Mexico felt like in 2012. Because even if Heriberto Lazcano was gone, his eyes weren't. They called it La Red Muda, the mute net. A vast network of local watchers, informal informants, and off-duty ex-military personnel embedded like dust in the everyday. No uniforms, no patrols, just knowledge. Observers, eyes trained to look for things that didn't belong. And the only thing more dangerous than being noticed in Zeta territory was being remembered. This wasn't paranoia, it was structure, designed by Lazcano himself. He had once said, "Our power is not in bullets. It's in knowing things before others decide to act." And so, across cities like Piedras Negras, Monclova, and Torreon, information was currency. Movements were tracked. Faces were cataloged. Outsiders were documented before they even stepped out of a bus. Lazcano's ghost had become omnipresent, not because he haunted the streets, but because his system did. But systems, no matter how efficient, can't resist entropy forever. By mid-2012, signs of stress began showing. For one, rivalries inside Los Zetas intensified. Without a visible leader, mid-tier commanders began jockeying for control, not of the whole cartel, but of pieces, zones, corridors, specific logistics routes. Like chess pieces forgetting the board had no king. One of the most notable fractures happened in Veracruz, where a cell once renowned for its discipline carried out an unsanctioned mass killing that left a pile of bodies in a tourist zone. Daylight, sloppy, covered in messages scrawled with red paint. Not Lazcano's style, not even close. Federal authorities used the incident as an opportunity to renew their offensive. Raids intensified. Files resurfaced. And suddenly, that familiar name reappeared in official documents. Heriberto Lazcano. Two names, doubled, one for the registry, one for the ghost. But while Mexico's security forces turned their gaze back to the Phantom General, something strange happened. His signature started disappearing. In training camps once aligned with Zeta doctrine, manuals were found half-burned. In safe houses, maps were scrubbed. Command structures collapsed without obvious succession plans. Even encrypted radio frequencies once thought to be permanent began broadcasting static. It was as if someone had pulled the plug, not on the cartel itself, but on its central nervous system. And yet, in this collapse, a pattern remained. In October of that year, mere days before the government declared Lazcano dead, a military warehouse in Coahuila reported the theft of 6 encrypted communication devices and a box of vintage GAIF uniforms. No suspects, no security footage, no alarms triggered. The same week, an armored SUV was found abandoned on a ranch near Sabinas. Inside, a half-eaten military ration, a Catholic prayer card folded 3 times, and a paperback novel, The Invisible Man. Coincidence? Many people still think so, but others say that was Lazcano's goodbye. A quiet wink from the man who never raised his voice, who saw retreat not as defeat, but as design. Because let's remember what he believed. Systems must survive without their creator. A leader who requires presence is a liability. A ghost, on the other hand, that's permanence. And so, when the news broke that Heriberto Lazcano had been killed in a firefight in Progreso, the world reacted in 2 ways. Some breathed relief, others narrowed their eyes because something felt off. For starters, the operation itself was unusually fast. According to reports, a tip came in. A unit was dispatched. A shootout ensued. 2 suspects dead. 1 matched Lazcano's ID. End of story. But here's the problem. There were no bullet casings at the scene. Locals reported hearing 1 burst of automatic fire, but no extended exchange. And strangest of all, no injuries on the Navy's side. Not a single scratch, not even a dent on their vehicles. This wasn't a gunfight. This was an arrangement. The body, supposedly Lazcano's, was collected, rushed to a funeral home, held under low security, and then stolen within hours by unidentified gunmen. It reads more like a ritual than an arrest. Even the coffin itself was unmarked. No nameplate, no fingerprints taken from the deceased, no verified autopsy. Just a press release and a closed casket that was opened only long enough for 1 photograph. Blurry, overexposed, and suspiciously symmetrical. Authorities claimed they had enough evidence to confirm his identity. Fingerprints, a healed fracture, a faint scar behind the ear. But critics pointed out that these details also matched 3 other men with similar builds, 2 of whom had disappeared from federal custody months prior. So the question remains, if that wasn't Lazcano, then where was he? A former intelligence officer, under condition of anonymity, offered a chilling theory. We think he tested his own protocol. We think he used a double, staged the entire event, and monitored the aftermath to see if his system would hold without him. And when it did, he disappeared for real. Where did he go? Some say Paraguay. Others whisper about Canada, of all places. A few believe he never left Mexico at all, that he's tucked away in a highland village where cell signals die and last names don't matter. But here's the uncomfortable truth. There are no answers. Just pieces. Just soft footsteps in places where no one is supposed to walk. So what do you think? Did the system let him fade? Or did he build it precisely so he could? There's a strange kind of weight to a missing man's presence. You don't need proof he's alive, just the shape he left behind. Heriberto Lazcano left shapes everywhere. Invisible fingerprints on the gears of a system that never stopped turning, even when the ghost who built it had supposedly vanished into smoke. In the year following his reported death, something curious began happening. Los Zetas didn't fall apart. They should have. Cartels built around a single powerful figure usually collapse when that figure dies, or at least fracture into smaller, messier offshoots. But not here. Not exactly. Instead, what emerged was stability. Not peace, never peace, but structure. Cells that had been operating under Lazcano's doctrine. Quiet, clockwork-like, brutal, but calculated, continued to follow the same patterns. They didn't wait for orders. They already knew them. One DEA report at the time stated plainly, Zeta operations across northern Mexico show no signs of disruption following the loss of leadership. This suggests a pre-configured delegation protocol, likely automated. Automated, like a machine with instructions left behind. It made some agents uneasy. Many people still think cartels are driven by personality. But Lazcano had spent years scrubbing personality out of his command. He didn't want charisma. He wanted rhythm, repetition, predictability. Inside his ranks, not outside. And it showed. In places like San Luis Potosí and Zacatecas, federal forces noticed something uncanny. Former lieutenants weren't rising to power. They weren't even stepping forward. They remained in their sectors, running things exactly as before, as if waiting, as if the absence of a leader was part of the plan. And that's when the real question began surfacing. Not who was leading the Zetas, but whether anyone needed to, because something else began to emerge. Not headlines, not chaos, but patterns. Power grids were hijacked with exact timing. Security cameras disabled in synchronized pulses. Drug shipments left ports at coordinated hours, hitting checkpoints without resistance. Too precise to be luck. Too consistent to be an accident. As one analyst wrote at the time, "We're no longer chasing a man, we're chasing a schedule." Think about that. A cartel running on a schedule, without a voice, without a face, just a rhythm, and a ghost behind the curtain. But still, not everyone believed Lazcano was gone. In Monterrey, a journalist investigating cartel financing claimed to have received a call from a man with military cadence. The message was brief. "You're looking for a name that doesn't need to be found. Look instead at the habits." She dropped the investigation within a week. Meanwhile, sightings kept trickling in. A grainy security camera clip from a gas station near Ciudad Victoria showed a tall man with a stiff gait filling up a pickup truck. No face, no license plate. But the build? The walk? The way he scanned the area without turning his head? Analysts flagged it. An hour later, the original footage was deleted from the station's servers. No trace. Just a call from someone checking on system maintenance, according to the station owner. Another event raised eyebrows. A raid on a Zeta safe house uncovered detailed training materials. Dozens of pages outlining discipline protocols, interrogation methods, and command codes, all signed with the same monogram, HLL, the exact initials of Heriberto Lazcano. Now it's true, monograms can be forged. But what disturbed investigators was the handwriting. Analysts compared it to notes recovered from a Zeta compound back in 2007. Same slant, same pressure, same margin spacing. This wasn't nostalgia, this was continuity. And if that weren't strange enough, someone began paying property taxes on 2 of Lazcano's former safe houses, quietly, on time, through third-party shell corporations. But the money was real, the paperwork legit. Who pays taxes on ghost homes, unless the ghost isn't gone? In Coahuila, one local priest, never named in any official report, allegedly confessed to colleagues that he once heard the confession of a man who had orchestrated storms but now feared thunder. He wouldn't say the name, but he kept a military rosary in his drawer afterward. Still, even legends grow cold. By 2014, Los Zetas began showing signs of true fragmentation. The elegance faded. New commanders emerged, louder, cruder, messier. The silence cracked. Headlines turned bloody again. Internal feuds made tabloids. The machinery, once smooth, began to grind. Analysts marked this as proof. Lazcano was gone, but others disagreed, because even in that chaos, operations persisted that bore his fingerprints. Targeted assassinations with no trace. Arms shipments rerouted through obscure Pacific ports. surveillance tech installed in places no cartel had previously reached. Municipal servers, telecom grids, not splashy, just efficient. So what do you do with a man like this? A man who might be dead, might be alive, but definitely refuses to exist the way others demand? You do what everyone eventually did. You stop looking for him, because ghosts don't live in places. They live in timing, in posture, in the moments just before a light flickers out. So what do you think? Did Lazcano train his people to live without him? Or is he still somewhere, watching the clock, making sure they haven't forgotten how, in stories about haunted houses, the ghosts never really do much. They creak a floorboard, swing a door, flicker a lamp. But it's never the ghost that scares people. It's what their presence implies. Unfinished business. Something left behind. Something that still wants to be understood. That's how Heriberto Lazcano lingered in the spaces he once moved through. Not in photos, not in film, but in the arrangement of things. In 2015, long after his death, authorities in Saltillo raided a property long believed to be one of Lazcano's unused homes. It was quiet, clean, almost too clean. No signs of a firefight, no drugs, no obvious cartel markers. Just order, rooms painted in neutral tones, a tidy kitchen, books on military logistics, some with passages marked in red pencil, a drawer filled with Catholic relics, rosaries, scapulars, small folded prayer cards written in tight, careful script, and in one bedroom, a mirror that had been turned to face the wall. It's the kind of thing that sounds meaningless, until you understand who Lazcano was. He was obsessed with angles, light, reflection, shadows, not out of vanity, out of caution. Some say he believed mirrors invited bad luck. Others say he hated the idea of leaving a reflection behind, a trace. Even when he was alone, he moved like someone who knew he might be watched. From above, from a hallway, from the future. And there, under the bed, agents found something else, a worn folder. Inside, a series of handwritten notes. Short, terse, strategic. One read, "Se debe saber cuándo abandonar el uniforme sin dejar la guerra." You must know when to abandon the uniform without abandoning the war. They weren't signed, but every one of them ended the same way. Kize. Now, it could have been any Zeta commander, but handwriting analysts compared those notes to two other samples found a decade earlier. The match was almost perfect, which begged the question, had Lazcano really died in 2012? Or had someone just decided the world no longer needed to see him, because this wasn't a man who ever needed to be seen. He led without speeches, conquered without ceremony, the kind of man who could walk into a room, rearrange the silence, and walk back out again, leaving people unsure he'd ever arrived. And yet, his story didn't end with the Progreso shootout. It kept breathing, kept being retold. In early 2016, a former Zeta mechanic, turned informant, spoke to reporters under heavy protection. He said he'd once been assigned to a safe house in Durango, where Lazcano spent exactly 6 hours. No one was allowed to speak to him, but they watched through a one-way mirror as he reviewed maps, ate a small meal, and washed his own dishes. 6 hours, no more, no less. Before leaving, he wiped every surface he'd touched, including the doorknob. He moved like a man who had already practiced disappearing, the mechanic said. Like he'd rehearsed it, not just once, but hundreds of times. This is where the myth becomes a little too real, because at some point, Lazcano stopped being a leader and became a design. A formula, a series of steps that could be taught, mimicked, adapted, like a ritual written in operational code. That's what separates him from the flamboyant dons of the past. He didn't want loyalty through fear. He wanted obedience through muscle memory. Many people still think that's why his system lasted so long, because it didn't need new ideas. It just needed to be remembered, even when rival cartels tried to adopt similar tactics. Military training, encrypted radios, staggered ambushes. They lacked Lazcano's core feature, discipline, born of shouting, but the kind bred into silence. And silence, in this case, was lethal. During a 2017 intel operation in Veracruz, law enforcement discovered a training ledger from a Zeta-affiliated cell. It contained pages of exercises, some expected, like weapons maintenance and field tactics, but others, eerily specific. Page 14. 5-minute field hygiene check. Observe fingernails. Page 23. Boots aligned eastward while resting. Page 31. Say nothing for the first 30 minutes after waking. Practice stillness. Why stillness? The instructors wouldn't say. But the informant present recalled the reason clearly. El jefe decía que el movimiento inútil revela miedo. The boss said useless movement reveals fear. They still called him El Jefe. Even 5 years after his alleged death, you don't get that kind of loyalty with gold or gifts. You get it by becoming the blueprint. Some say Lazcano made his final escape into a borderless kind of existence. A routine so tight it no longer required the man behind it. Just followers, just echoes. Others say he's still watching, still pulling strings through 2 or 3 degrees of separation. Or maybe, just maybe, he really did walk away. Leave it all behind. The system, the soldiers, the silence. Retreat into some part of the world where nothing needs him anymore. A place where no one whispers Z like a warning. So what do you think? If you built a machine to outlive you and it worked, would you come back? Or would you sit in the dark, listening to the world run like a song you composed and never needed to conduct again? By the time 2018 rolled around, most officials, at least publicly, had moved on. Files labeled Lazcano gathered dust in government archives, and press briefings no longer included his name. The headlines had shifted. New villains had emerged. Flashier, sloppier, more prone to Instagram and death. But beneath the noise, there were murmurs. Not sightings, not confessions, just disruptions. A shipment intercepted in Reynosa, wrapped with surgical care. No fingerprints, no blood, just product, logistics, and a receipt signed in triplicate. A quiet Zeta revival in the highlands near San Luis Potosi. Members operating with eerie coordination, uniforms pressed, rifles spotless, code words unchanged since 2011. A banker in Guadalajara arrested with ledgers dating back years, all encrypted in the exact syntax Lazcano was known to use. And then the radio message. Short, tinny, almost forgettable. It came in on an old frequency long abandoned by most agencies. 3 words, spoken with military precision. Protocol continues. Adjust. No voice ID. No context. Just that. Authorities didn't publicize it, but in internal memos they noted a shift in cartel movements shortly after. Not just the Zetas. Others too. Territories redrawn. Contacts silenced. Whole routes rerouted without warning. It was as if someone had whispered instructions into the void, and the void had responded. The unsettling part? No one claimed responsibility, which brings us to the idea that maybe, just maybe, Heriberto Lazcano didn't die. He just delegated disappearance, because that's the thing about ghosts. You don't have to see them. You just have to feel when they're near. So let's talk about what remained. At the center of the legend was always this strange contradiction. Lazcano was a man who built systems to endure, but erased himself from every corner of them. No photos, no fingerprints, no lineage flaunted, no ego displayed. He once reportedly burned every childhood photo of himself in his mother's house, quietly and without ceremony. He wasn't erasing history, he was editing it, rewriting the idea of what it meant to lead. A former associate described the experience like this: he didn't command you, he designed you, like a room. You didn't realize you were following him until the ceiling was already over your head. His power came not from presence, but from absence made intentional. It's a theory that haunts intelligence analysts to this day, that Lazcano wasn't just trying to evade capture. He was performing a disappearing act so complete it would live longer than he ever could, because after all, a living man can be caught. A ghost? A ghost is just a shape you assign to the unexplained, and the unexplained never ends. Let's zoom in on a small village in southern Durango where in 2019, a minor electrical contractor reported something strange. A customer requesting a full rewiring job in a secluded cabin, but with unusual demands. No external lines, no wireless, everything manual, everything analog. When asked why, the customer reportedly replied, "I don't need connection, I need insulation." The contractor didn't ask more. He got paid in full, cash, clean bills, counted by hand. Later, when shown photos of Lazcano, the contractor blinked and said nothing. But then he asked, "Wasn't that guy supposed to be dead?" Moments like that don't prove anything, not legally, but they form a shape. A man like Lazcano doesn't just leave behind operations. He leaves behind rules, rituals, the kind of legacy that doesn't gather dust. It gathers rhythm. In some cartel cells, Zeta protocol is still observed down to the detail. Commanders speak in short phrases, rest only between 0200 and 500 hours, and keep their rifles facing east while they sleep. No one questions it. They just do it, because that's what was taught, and no one ever said the teacher was gone. Many people still think he died in that Progresso shootout. But even if he did, does it matter? His body may be gone, but the shape remains. The system moves. The ghost commands, even if no one hears the whisper anymore. The legend holds tight to one last rule: never return. Because returning breaks the myth, and Lazcano was never about presence. He was about effect. So what do you think? Would you rather be feared while you're alive, or obeyed long after they've buried someone who wasn't you? You don't notice a machine until it breaks. That's the oldest truth in engineering, and maybe in organized crime too. But Heriberto Lazcano didn't build a machine designed to impress. He built one designed to disappear into background noise, to hum just under the threshold of chaos, never quite loud enough to draw the eye, but never so quiet that you forget it's there. And in 2020, that hum was still echoing. Across Mexico, federal raids continued. Cartel factions clashed. Names rotated through headlines like interchangeable villains in an endless drama. But behind the flash and noise, familiar patterns persisted. The kind only a trained observer would catch. Take this. In January of that year, authorities in Michoacan intercepted a convoy of 4 SUVs, each filled with automatic rifles, encrypted radios, and precisely measured rations: rice, dried beans, and vitamins, each labeled with expiration dates. Nothing flashy, everything durable. The radios, when cracked, revealed a curious pattern. The frequency shifts weren't random. They followed a cycle, rotating every 36 hours in sync with a pattern last seen in Zeta operations under Lazcano's known leadership. The agents didn't find a leader, just silence, empty vehicles, prepped campsites, boot prints in the mud arranged in perimeter formation. A ghost, still rehearsing his steps. But the strangest discovery? A list. Written in block lettering, the paper simply read, "Aquí no se improvisa." There is no improvisation here. That phrase became something of a catchphrase among field agents, a punchline, a warning, a code, because even though Los Zetas had long since fractured into splinters, some absorbed by the Jalisco New Generation cartel, others scattered into local militias, there was still one vein that ran colder than the rest, the ones that still ran by his rhythm. It's this rhythm that brought a peculiar case to the surface later that year. In the hills of Hidalgo, police investigating a kidnapping stumbled onto what looked like a makeshift training compound. Half-built walls, camo nets, tire stacks. But the real surprise came from what they didn't find. No drugs, no cash, no hostages, just manuals, laminated, color-coded, stored in weatherproof crates. Titles like Entrenamiento Básico, Células Autónomas, Estructura y Sigilo, Mandos Regionales, Silencio como Escudo, Silence as Shield. No names, no authors, but familiar phrasing. Lazcano's phrasing, or at least his design language. Short directives, tactical diagrams drawn in the Gafe style, with overlays that could only have come from someone trained not just to fight, but to instruct. It wasn't the presence of these materials that unnerved investigators. It was the timing. Just days before the raid, a federal wiretap had picked up a conversation in the region. A male voice, muffled and cautious, saying, "Él no se ha ido, solo se ha vuelto innecesario." He hasn't gone. He just became unnecessary. And there it was again. The idea that Heriberto Lazcano hadn't been defeated. He had simply completed his task. Because when you build a system that runs on silence, the ultimate goal isn't to rule forever. It's to not be needed at all. The more you study Lazcano's legacy, the more this becomes clear. He wasn't just escaping prosecution. He was subtracting himself from history, one layer at a time, erasing fingerprints, delegating roles, leaving behind principles, not instructions. In 2021, during a routine document audit in Coahuila's municipal archives, a clerk uncovered an unsigned architectural blueprint for a small fortress-like compound in the Sierra Madre Oriental. No name attached, just a stamped monogram, HLZA. The design included underground storage, 3 unmarked access roads, and a command room with angled walls that deflected sound. It was never built, or if it was, no one's found it. But the blueprint didn't feel like a fantasy. It felt like a draft from a man who thought in blueprints. Many people still think Lazcano died in 2012. Others argue he faked his death to escape law enforcement, only to fall victim to rival groups in the shadows. Still others, those in the field, the ones who see the shape of things, suspect the truth is quieter, that he disappeared by design, that he's watching, not through drones or satellites, but through behavior, through a system he crafted, not to glorify himself, but to survive him. So what do you think? If you created something so perfectly structured it didn't require your name anymore, would you sign it? Or would you leave it unsigned? Let the myth become the author. Ghosts don't knock. They slip through the gaps you didn't know you left open, between radio transmissions, through half-lit corridors, in the pause between orders given and actions taken. That's how Heriberto Lazcano still moved, if he moved at all. Not with force, but with blueprint, with rhythm, with systems that carried his imprint even after the man himself had been removed from the board, or pretended to be. By 2022, the idea of Lazcano had evolved into something else entirely. He was no longer a man to be caught, tried, or even remembered accurately. He had become an algorithm, an internal logic that still operated within scattered Zeta cells across northern and central Mexico, even in splinter groups like Zeta Nueva Generación or Los Talibanes. There were strange alignments, training modules that matched his style. Surveillance tactics lifted directly from old GAFE doctrine. Rituals of silence observed before key operations. The smallest indicators that his rules had outlived his name. And then there was the safe house in Tlaxcala, discovered during an unrelated investigation into stolen fuel. The house was buried beneath a modest countryside home. No outward signs, just a slightly newer coat of paint, and a dog that barked only once when federal agents approached. Inside, surgical cleanliness, a pantry organized by caloric density, maps without labels, and in the farthest room, sealed with a reinforced steel door, was a wall lined with notebooks, dozens of them, bound in thick brown covers. No titles. The contents? Procedures. Each book contained hypothetical scenarios and tactical breakdowns. What to do if your network is compromised. Evacuation protocols with decoy routes. How to operate under the illusion of death. No author claimed them. But inside the cover of one notebook was a simple phrase. El comandante nunca muere, solo cambia de frecuencia. The commander never dies. He just changes frequencies. Investigators couldn't pin them to any one cartel. The fingerprints were too faint, the notes too careful. But the system? That was familiar. One commander from the task force said privately, "It's like we're chasing muscle memory. The body is gone, but the reflex is still there," which might be the most accurate description of Lazcano yet, because what does it mean when a man's greatest accomplishment is not what he built, but how little of himself he left behind? He had always operated that way. From the earliest days, back when he was just another recruit in GAFE, he learned to train without attachment, to lead without celebration, and to vanish without leaving heat. He didn't teach loyalty. He taught obedience to rhythm, and that rhythm kept pulsing. In a sleepy village outside Gomez Palacio, a mid-ranking Zeta operative was arrested in early 2023. No bloodshed, no resistance. Just a man with too many phones and a surprisingly worn paperback copy of The Art of War. When asked about his affiliation, he didn't hesitate. He said, "Zeta, always." When pressed on leadership, he said, "No one leads. The rules lead." And when asked what rules, he smiled. "The old ones." This is where the myth tightens. Because for all the brutality attributed to Lazcano's organization, those who served under him still describe it as clean. Not morally clean, just functionally clean. No wasted energy, no theatrics, and above all, no emotion. In one intercepted voice note passed between Zeta affiliates, a calm voice delivers a reminder. El silencio no es una debilidad, es una señal. Silence is not weakness, it is a signal. That could have been any voice, but for those who listened closely, the cadence, it was familiar, sharp, measured, punctuated like a man who still thought in drills, not conversations. No confirmation, of course, no forensics, no traceable source. But it didn't stop the whisper. He's still here, and maybe that's enough, because legends aren't sustained by sightings. They're fed by patterns. And if a man can disappear so perfectly that his work keeps breathing in his absence, is he really gone? Or has he simply reached a kind of victory no one else imagined? The kind where you're not remembered for who you were, but for what still moves like you. The systems, the stillness, the shadows that walk in formation long after your boots have left the ground. So what do you think? If you trained every soldier to ignore your name but follow your rhythm, is that death or is that design? In folklore, the most dangerous ghosts are the ones that don't know they're dead. But Heriberto Lazcano? If he is a ghost, he wrote his own obituary and left it unsigned. Not out of confusion, but out of precision. Because death to a man like him, wasn't an ending. It was a tool. And by 2024, the world had mostly stopped looking, at least openly. The headlines had shifted. Public interest had moved on. And Los Zetas, once feared across Mexico as the most militarized cartel force the country had ever seen, had fractured into dust, blending into newer names, louder gangs, younger, flashier tyrants with poor impulse control. But beneath the noise, the blueprint persisted. In Chiapas, Guerrero, and parts of Veracruz, small but consistent patterns began showing up in surveillance. Not the flash of new cartels staking territory, not the spray of chaos that follows ambition. No, this was quieter, like faint footprints in wet soil left by someone still pacing in circles long after the search dogs had gone home. What did they find? Timing. In one sting, a convoy moving black market weapons arrived at a handoff location 6 seconds ahead of a predicted schedule from a long-defunct Zeta route. 6 seconds, not 6 minutes. 6. As if someone was still keeping the original clocks running. In another, a safe house uncovered in a dried-up mining town was lined with maps labeled only by radio tower signals and supply cache icons. No names, no brands, just operational geometry. And the beds? Still made? The canned goods? Fresh? The floors? Swept. They didn't find bodies, just residue. The kind of residue that suggests a presence that's been trained not to leave traces, but rhythm. A private contractor embedded with Mexican federal forces reportedly noted that these sites were sterile, but not abandoned. He said, "It's like someone's still here, but only in protocol," which brings us back to Lazcano, because while the world might accept his death, the places he once moved through don't. They still behave like he's watching. Old lieutenants, now graying, won't say his name. When asked, they refer to him only with gestures, 2 fingers tapped to the temple, 1 down to the ground. He was here. He is beneath. And then there's the story of the man in Zacatecas. In late 2024, a federal agent on an unrelated investigation found himself seated beside an older gentleman at a roadside restaurant. Quiet, alone, trim build, clean nails, didn't touch his food for 7 minutes. Just listened. When the agent paid and left, he noticed a folded napkin beneath his coffee cup, written in blue ink. In perfect block letters, "You should stop asking about people who are no longer necessary." Surveillance footage from the restaurant was corrupted. Power blinked just after the man left. No license plates, no digital trace. The napkin had no fingerprints, but the handwriting? It was sent for analysis. Unofficially, the analyst's note came back. Matches consistent with HLL logbooks. Confidence level 81%. Nothing conclusive, but enough to stir unease. Because again, this wasn't about citing a man. It was about recognizing the silence that follows him. The calibration he left behind. Like a piano that still plays in tune even when no one sits at the bench. Lazcano's style wasn't legacy in the traditional sense. It wasn't about monuments or statues. It was about systems that don't question themselves. His old rules still echo in cartel structure audits. No photos, no personal calls, no family at command posts. Rotate locations every 72 hours. Eat at fixed times. Silence for the first and last 5 minutes of each meeting. These aren't just rules. They're religion. And every time they show up, unchanged, unclaimed, it's like watching the ghost blink. Even the language remains intact. Code words embedded in casual conversation. Shadows used instead of guards. Lanterns for surveillance equipment. Snow, not for cocaine, but for cleaned routes. Paths swept of tails. The structure speaks louder than any voice. Many people still think that Heriberto Lazcano, if alive, has become irrelevant. But irrelevance only matters to those who measure power in headlines, to those who measure power in influence. in what still gets done long after the architect leaves the room, Lazcano remains terrifying, because a man who disappears without resistance is one thing. A man who disappears with purpose is another. So what do you think? Is the ghost still walking? Or did he simply train the wind to sound like footsteps? Some names echo louder when they're no longer spoken. That's the paradox of Heriberto Lazcano, how the absence of his voice became the clearest sound in the room. And by 2025, that sound still lingers. Fainter, perhaps, more muffled, but unmistakably there. There's no shrine to him, no corrido glorifying his rise, no Netflix dramatization with a moody actor wearing fake scars. Lazcano refused myth in the usual sense. He didn't want to be remembered by story. He wanted to be embedded in structure, and it seems he succeeded. In the latest classified report circulated between joint Mexican-American security forces, a curious line appears. In zones previously dominated by Zeta operations, tactical consistency remains above threshold, despite fragmentation of leadership. This suggests persistent doctrinal discipline, not personality-based enforcement. In plainer words, his playbook outlived him. Because while other cartels rise and fall with their kings, Lazcano had planted a different seed. A cult of routine, not of ego. No gold statues. No nicknames shouted from convoys. Just repetition, quiet compliance, and an almost monastic sense of order. And in a world addicted to noise, order becomes its own kind of ghost. Let's revisit one last story. Quiet, easily overlooked, but worth its weight in whispers. In a town outside of Ciudad del Maíz, a schoolteacher turned police clerk stumbled upon an unregistered property file dating back to 2006. The name on the deed was false, but the tax records were pristine. Every quarter paid, not a cent missed. She got curious, visited the property. What she found wasn't dramatic. A low house, unassuming. Inside, a desk, a portable radio, a lined notebook with the first 10 pages torn out. On the back page, a phrase in Spanish, printed in ink so faint it looked like it had been written just to fade. Nunca regreses donde ya fuiste temido. Never return to where you were already feared. She reported it. The file was taken, the house was cleared, and a week later, her post was reassigned to a new clerk. No reason given, just transition. Smooth, cold, efficient. That, in essence, was Lazcano, a man who didn't just vanish. He instructed the world on how to forget him. And yet, forgetting someone whose systems still run is like ignoring gravity because it's too quiet. So we arrive here, the end of the trail, or as close as we'll ever get. You've walked through the echo chambers he built. You've seen the clean kitchens, the erased fingerprints, the discipline that operated long after the man stepped off stage. You've listened to voices that claimed he was alive, voices that claimed he was dead, and voices that didn't care, because his instructions still worked. Many people still think he's watching, somewhere remote. Old now, perhaps. A man unburdened by empire because his empire no longer needs him. Others believe he's long gone, buried in some anonymous plot under a name he never used, with a gravestone no one visits. But maybe the real truth is this. Lazcano understood something most don't. That to truly endure, you don't need to live forever. You just need to vanish at the right moment, after the system can run without you, but before it forgets who set it in motion. So what do you think? Would you rather be seen for a moment, or remembered in the way people breathe without thinking? Because somewhere out there, in the rhythm of a convoy that leaves no tracks, in the schedule of a soldier who never breaks formation, in the silence before a decision is made, there's still a trace of him. Not a name, not a legend, just a frequency. Low, steady, instructive, like a ghost still commanding the room. Now let your mind loosen its grip a little. You've followed the story of a man who may no longer exist, or who may exist exactly the way he wanted, quietly, invisibly, in the mechanisms others still obey without knowing why. Wherever you are right now, maybe your lights are low, maybe there's a soft fan humming nearby, maybe the air feels just still enough. Allow the tension to dissolve. Let the names fall away. Let the acronyms drift. Let the whispered theories float gently out of reach. There's nothing left to chase tonight. The ghost has walked far enough, and in the soft hush of what remains, you are allowed, just for a moment, to exhale. Sleep comes not as surrender, but as an acknowledgement. You've made it to the end of a story that never quite ends. Let the silence cradle you now. Let the stillness do the rest. Heriberto Lazcano used to say, "The best way to hide a body is to convince the world it was never there." He wasn't talking about corpses. He was talking about himself. And so, after the whisper fade of his supposed death, after the stolen coffin and the stolen silence, came the part of the story most people never notice: the echo management. The slow, deliberate process of erasing not just the man, but the outline of the man. It began with the records, military logs that once contained details of Lazcano's early years in GAFE. His entry date, his units, his assignments, began to evaporate, not vanish entirely, but degrade. Paperwork once easily obtained by press or NGOs suddenly had pages redacted, signatures blurred by low-quality scans. The files still existed, but only just. Several journalists tried to reconstruct his early military timeline using official sources. Most gave up. The data had been quietly, gently scrubbed, not by fire, but by fog. A few photocopies survived, but they no longer led anywhere. Then came the fingerprints. One DEA informant, deep in Zeta ranks, reported that Lazcano had spent months in the mid-2000s developing a protocol to remove biometric data from circulation. Not erase it completely, which would raise flags, but overwrite it. The plan was elegant. Have someone with a similar build arrested under a fake name. Attach Lazcano's outdated prints to the arrest profile. Let them linger in the system. That way, if a body ever turned up with Lazcano's prints, the record would say, "Already in custody," a contradiction the bureaucracy would trip over. The ghost didn't just vanish. He gave the machine a dummy to chase, and that dummy ran well past 2012. You might remember the alleged body recovered in Progresso. No dental records. Fingerprints? Questionable. And the man's face? Damaged just enough to require speculation. The perfect decoy. Some think Lazcano had been preparing it for years, building a stand-in identity to absorb the heat. He even had a voice replacement, a low-ranking operative who practiced his speech cadence, kept to a strict vocal rhythm, used only a certain type of radio when delivering commands, one that distorted pitch just enough to create plausible audio evidence for law enforcement. The recordings matched what authorities had on file. Case closed, but it was a ventriloquist act. And the real speaker? Somewhere else, training others, writing down systems in field notebooks that read like scripture, procedures for infiltration, rules of non-exposure, even how to plant false sightings in cities where he'd never set foot, just to create noise and camouflage the quiet. One entry reads, "Create shadow corridors. Let them chase ghosts between mirrors." And chase they did. In the years following his supposed death, security forces reported over 24 sightings across Mexico, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Texas. Every single one ended the same way. Too late. By the time boots hit the ground, the man was gone, or had never been there. Still, many believe he was in those places. Not in the flesh, but in doctrine. Each safe house bore his rhythm. The kitchens ordered, the radios silent, the departure plans logged 3 days ahead. The closer investigators got to the heart of his machinery, the more they began to realize there was no heart. Just gears. He'd removed himself from the center long ago, and that removal wasn't panic, it was strategy, because Lazcano didn't want to be remembered as a man. He wanted to be remembered as a method, the quiet method, so much so that even his enemies started borrowing from him. The Sinaloa cartel adopted Zeta-style communications. Jalisco cells trained with former military contractors who used Lazcano's scattered writings like textbooks. Even municipal police departments, corrupted or otherwise, began organizing their command tiers using the Zeta model. He had become the skeleton inside the larger body of organized crime, faceless, identifiable only by posture. You can still trace him if you know where to look, not in names but in absence, not in noise, but in systems that do not waver. A ranch with 3 exit routes and no central sleeping quarters. That's Lazcano. A crew that carries encrypted books instead of phones. That's Lazcano. A room swept every 3 hours, even if no one enters. Lazcano. No signature, just ritual. Many people still think this was about ego, but the truth is, it may have been about freedom. Not the kind bought with power, but the kind that comes when no one knows you exist anymore. So what do you think? Is there such a thing as vanishing too well? Or did Heriberto Lazcano simply graduate from man to method? There's a saying in some circles, when the commander disappears, the order remains. It sounds like something pulled from a war novel, but those who trained under Heriberto Lazcano didn't read that line. They lived it. And by the time the world declared him dead, they'd already memorized what to do in his absence. This wasn't loyalty. It wasn't fear. It was function. That's why, even years later, in parts of Mexico and Central America, the rhythm still beat. One of the strangest discoveries came in 2025 during a narcotics bust in Honduras. The shipment was standard, a truck full of banana crates, packed beneath with kilograms of processed fentanyl. But what startled the agents wasn't the drugs. It was the logistics sheet taped to the underside of the driver's seat. Not just any checklist. A checklist in GAFE code, down to the spacing, abbreviations, and margin discipline. With phrasing straight out of 2006 Zeta protocol, last seen in camps Lazcano personally supervised. Things like CP1, rear exit untagged by visual or digital. BA rotate vehicle every 6 days regardless of movement. SC sleeps facing entry with bootlace undone, left side only. These weren't just tips. They were behavioral orders. Deep cuts from the old manual. Unmistakable. When interrogated, the driver, barely 24, claimed he didn't know the origin of the instructions. "It's just how it's always been," he said. "They told me we do things this way because it works. Whoever they are, they still follow Lazcano's muscle memory, because that's how deeply his doctrine embedded. It became habit passed down without attribution. No one remembered the name. They just followed the steps. But the ones who do remember, they speak of one thing above all, his eyes. A former lieutenant, now turned federal informant, was once asked what Lazcano's defining trait had been. Not as a boss, but as a presence. His answer? He didn't blink when others panicked. That's it. Not a metaphor. He literally didn't blink. Others described it too. That eerie, controlled gaze. Part calculation, part stillness. Not cold exactly, but empty of delay. As if he'd already pre-lived the moment. He didn't speak unless necessary. Never lectured, never threatened. But he would sometimes place his hand on a subordinate's shoulder and squeeze once. No smile, no nod. Just a signal. It meant, "You've already failed, now correct it." That was enough. In Zeta culture, no raised voice was required. Only structure. Only the known consequences of deviation, never spelled out, but always present. Even in exile, or death, if we believe the official version, this structure continued. In Tamaulipas, federal raids revealed a strange trend among surviving Zeta enclaves. Identical timing structures. Every cell changed passwords on Sundays at 0300. Every shipment left its staging area at 0145, regardless of how close or far the next point was. That's not coincidence, that's legacy, and it goes further. One group of cybersecurity researchers studying cartel data traffic noted a recurring silence in encrypted channels, 6 minutes every 24 hours, across multiple cells, during which no transmissions occurred. When plotted, these windows aligned with the exact timing of GAFE radio checks from the late 1990s, a moment of enforced digital stillness, a pause. It was essentially a salute. Now think about that. A salute to someone who may not even be alive. Or if he is, who hasn't shown his face, voice, or fingerprint in over a decade. And still, he commands a pause. But perhaps the most eerie trace came in 2025 from a source nobody expected, a poet living anonymously in southern Mexico. This poet, whose brother had once worked as a courier for the Zetas, published a tiny chapbook with no ISBN, no publisher, no promotion. Inside, a single poem reads, "He stood in the middle of us, but no one turned to look. He left before the coffee cooled, and still the chairs remained facing north." No name attached, but agents who found the pamphlet swore the phrasing sounded familiar, like something scribbled in the margins of old Zeta memos. Lazcano used to write things like that. Coded instructions buried in metaphor. Strategic ambiguity, disguised as poetry. Was it him, or just someone taught by someone who once stood in his line of sight? Either way, the presence lingers. A former high-ranking member now in federal custody put it simply: there are bosses, and then there are architects. Lazcano, he wasn't running things, he was drawing them. And once you've drawn something the right way, it doesn't need you anymore. So what do you think? If a man builds something that breathes without him, do you call it survival, or do you call it art? By the time most figures fade from public view, what's left behind is usually speculation, nostalgia, or mythology. But with Heriberto Lazcano, what was left behind wasn't legend. It was logistics, where other crime lords left behind ghost stories and gold-plated pistols. Lazcano left calendars, flowcharts, operating procedures in waterproof ink. In 2025, during an extensive audit of cartel-related financial activity in Mexico's petroleum sector, investigators uncovered a fascinating anomaly: a network of front companies, all small, all registered within a 3-month period in 2009, were still moving product. Not drugs, not weapons, diesel. And the money? Traced quietly to invisible owners. No photos, no public records. Just signatures that matched legal templates used by known Zeta legal teams from the Lazcano era. One company, based in Puebla, was still paying taxes early. Not on time, early. And here's where things get weird. When auditors visited the listed office address, they found nothing but an empty storefront with one peculiar detail: a small brass placard inside the doorframe reading, "El reloj no manda, la instrucción sí." The clock doesn't command, the instruction does. It wasn't decoration, it was a directive, the kind Lazcano used to leave. This wasn't homage, this was continuation, because his system never depended on his survival. That's the part people get wrong. Lazcano didn't build a house, he built a circuit. Self-contained, self-cleaning, repetition over charisma, clarity over loyalty, execution over explanation. And nowhere is that more clear than in what his former enemies now admit. Rival cartel members, those who once viewed the Zetas as madmen with uniforms, have, over the years, come to respect Lazcano's methods. Some have even adopted them. In 2023, Jalisco New Generation Cartel began issuing an internal field guide called El Manual Silencioso. It's not branded. No one takes credit for its authorship. But intelligence analysts confirm page after page mimics the Zeta procedural style to an eerie degree. Things like move without rhythm, but always by schedule. Sleep in shifts. The one who wakes last sweeps the floor. Never apologize, adjust. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of control. And this phrase, repeated at the end of every chapter, the ghost is the guide. It's not even subtle anymore. Even the enemy knows. They're walking through a map he drew. One former Sinaloa enforcer, now working with government agencies under protection, once described an odd moment during a prison stint. He overheard a young Zeta recruit practicing radio protocol in a broom closet at 2 a.m., alone, whispering into an unplugged mic. When he asked why, the kid said, "So if he returns, I'm ready. Not if he speaks, not if he calls. If he returns, still ready." You don't get that kind of imprint from fear alone. That's design. And even today, in cartel cases spanning from Chihuahua to Chiapas, prosecutors find signs of Lazcano's influence, not just in how things are done, but in how things aren't done. No selfies, no flashy parties, no traceable phones, no conversations longer than necessary, no reason to be known. The old discipline still survives like a low tide under the stormy surface of modern cartel warfare, unseen but shaping everything above. And yet, for all this, no credible sighting of Lazcano has ever emerged since that coffin vanished in 2012. Some theorize he lives somewhere in the southern cone, Argentina or Uruguay perhaps, managing code names and investments through proxies who've never seen his face. Others say he's long dead, that the legend simply grew a spine. But maybe there's another possibility. Maybe he's not hiding. Maybe he's watching the world rehearse his methods and realizing he doesn't have to step in. That the system, the structure, the instruction, the invisibility has transcended the man. Because Lazcano was never trying to be remembered. He was trying to disappear correctly. And in that vanishing act, he may have accomplished what no other capo ever did. Turned crime into choreography. Turned vanishing into legacy. So what do you think? If the silence keeps working, does the voice ever need to return? By now, the man has slipped almost completely into abstraction. Heriberto Lazcano is no longer a figure with coordinates or a dossier with fingerprints. He's become something else entirely, an atmospheric pressure, a barometric dip in the silence before a cartel moves, before a convoy rolls, before a trigger is pulled. And yet, his name still shivers through conversations in back rooms and interrogation cells. Never shouted, just hinted at, like static before the storm. In 2026, a curious file emerged from a joint task force focused on human trafficking in southern Mexico. Amid the data dump was a report from a failed raid in Tabasco. A safe house cleared before arrival, food warm on the table, beds made, laptops wiped. Nothing new, except one thing, a whiteboard. On it, scrawled in dry erase marker, was a phrase written in large military block letters. Retirarse no es rendirse, es reformular. To retreat is not to surrender, it is to reformat. The handwriting? Familiar. Investigators paused, not because they thought he'd been there, but because they knew someone who had learned from someone who had. The line was pure Lazcano, not in tone, but in intention. A mindset engineered not for resistance, but for adaptation. That was always his deeper genius. Most cartel bosses ruled by holding on tighter. Lazcano built a system that required letting go. At the right moment, in the right direction, with the right decoy. It's the same reason he was never seen in flashy funeral processions or Instagram leaks. His greatest weapons were timing, removal, and ritual. And yet, something about 2026 feels different. Security officials report an uptick in ghost patterns, movements without origin, training sites activated, then abandoned, routes optimized along old Zeta supply lines, communications so disciplined they almost seem computer-generated. But they're not. They're human. And what's more disturbing is that the humans following them aren't always aware of who designed them. One low-level operative detained near Tuxtla Gutierrez said something strange during his debrief. "We're following orders left in drawers. We don't need a leader anymore." That line stuck with the interrogator. Orders left in drawers. That's not paranoia. That's protocol. Across Mexico, the language continues. In courtrooms, defendants refer to the instructions more than the bosses. In intercepted calls, the phrases reset rotation, radio silence complete, and 2-minute movement windows appear with mechanical regularity, and always with the same sentiment: no improvisation. Improvisation was weakness. Lazcano eliminated it, which makes what happens next even stranger. A former logistics officer, working now as a confidential informant, claims to have seen a man in northern Guatemala, older, thinner, quiet, in a market at 6 a.m., selecting plantains with surgical care. No guards, no panic, just precision. The informant didn't recognize the man until he saw him reach for a canteen from under his shirt, tucked on the left, always the left. A known Lazcano habit from his early days. Not many knew that detail. The informant followed. The man walked 6 blocks, turned into a quiet house, and was never seen exiting again. When asked by federal agents if he was sure, the informant only said, "I wasn't told to look for him, but the moment I saw him, I stood straighter, like my spine remembered who he was." The house, by the time agents arrived, was clean. No prints, no fibers, no heat signatures, but the chair by the window was turned to face north. Small detail, but not an accident. You might ask, what's the point of such control if no one is watching? But maybe someone is, because in the surveillance world, absence is never empty. It's full of guesses, patterns, ghosts we can't quite prove, but can't ignore. And the biggest ghost of all still casts a long, structured shadow. One internal memo from a special intelligence unit in Mexico City ends with this note: Lazcano protocol behaviors persist in 5 of 9 regions. Assume the system remains live. Adjust approach accordingly. Live. They're not calling him alive. They're calling the system alive. And that's even scarier, because while most cartel leaders die and are mourned, celebrated, or scorned, Lazcano has become something else, quietly functional. Not remembered in murals or song, but in doorways left unpainted, clocks synced to movement, and training schedules adhered to long after the trainer is presumed dust. So what do you think? If your ghost keeps teaching the living, is it really gone? Or have you simply perfected the art of being present by absence? By now, the lines between myth and manual are so blurred that even seasoned analysts don't pretend to know where Heriberto Lazcano ends and where his system begins. It's like trying to find the first note in a song that's already halfway through. By the time you're listening, it's already playing you. In 2027, a senior field analyst for an international intelligence firm compiled a private report titled The Quiet Ones. It wasn't about a person. It was about behavioral continuity, how criminal organizations replicate themselves through ritual, not personality. The primary case study? Lazcano. The report included this striking line: Zeta-aligned operatives don't act like soldiers. They act like reflections. The original movement came from someone else. They're just mirroring what was already rehearsed. Let's talk about that. In the cartel world, identities shift like desert sand. Names change, alliances crumble, methods evolve. But even as power recycles itself, Lazcano's silhouette remains unnaturally still, not because he clings to life, but because his style does. Take the Nuevo Leon intercept, a surveillance operation conducted over 90 days in early 2027. Analysts monitoring encrypted radio frequencies picked up a signal at the same time every night. 2:17 a.m. No voice, no words, just a 2-second pulse, then silence. After weeks of tracking, they discovered the same signal pattern across 6 different regions. Some Zeta affiliated, others not. It wasn't a call. It was a timestamp, a heartbeat in code, an artifact of routine. But the equipment used? Outdated. Early 2000s military issue. No one carries it anymore. Except, apparently, those who follow instructions written long before smartphones ruled the world. One field agent on the case remarked, "It's like someone built a sundial, and the sun still shows up out of respect." And if that metaphor sounds dramatic, consider what was found during a 2027 bust in Veracruz. In a modest 2-room safe house, a cot, tightly made, 2 burner phones, unopened, 1 wooden box with no lock, no label. Inside, a folded uniform shirt, spotless, a rosary, and a laminated index card. On the card, printed neatly, checklist, day 24/7, wake before light, review maps, listen, don't speak, rehearse exit, make no mark, leave something clean, day 24 and 17. That's over 6.5 years. No one uses checklists like that unless they were taught to by someone who lived by them. And maybe that's where this whole story takes a stranger turn, because now, even outsiders are adopting his systems. Certain municipal police departments, quietly complicit in local operations, have begun mimicking old Zeta routines, rotating officers in 72-hour shifts, coordinating patrols with absolute silence over radio, cleaning locker rooms with military precision. Not because they admire Lazcano, but because it works. The system, stripped of its origin, still operates, even across borders. In Guatemala, a raid on a logistics compound revealed storage crates organized in perfect symmetry, labeled not by product, but by radio code. As if the labels weren't for inventory, but for timing. And there, in a drawer near the main office desk, was a photo. Faded, cropped, blurry, but unmistakably him, Lazcano, standing by a tree in what looked like southern Mexico, alone, arms crossed, not posing, just waiting. The photo had no date, and someone had scratched a line into the back. La rutina es el jefe ahora. The routine is the boss now. It didn't matter if the photo was old or doctored or real. The point wasn't the image. The point was that the man, dead or alive, was still present. Not as flesh, but as expectation. You see, the brilliance of Lazcano was never the fear he inspired. It was the discipline he demanded. A discipline that became so second nature, it now moves through people who never met him, who weren't even born when he last appeared. That's more than legacy. That's architecture. A former DEA strategist once described him this way: Lazcano didn't build a pyramid. He built plumbing, invisible, silent, and everywhere. And it's still flowing. So what do you think? Can a ghost haunt not by presence but by design? And if a system keeps running without its creator, flawless, quiet, precise, was the ghost ever separate from the machine? Or was the machine his final body? It's hard to say where Heriberto Lazcano ends and muscle memory begins. Especially now. Especially after so much time has passed, and so many others have fallen, faded, or flamed out. His peers went down in handcuffs, on camera, or in shootouts framed like movie scenes. He, on the other hand, left like a sentence that trails off. By 2028, Entire generations of cartel foot soldiers are being trained by people who were trained by people who were trained by someone who once heard Lazcano speak. Once. Maybe. And yet the rules still hold. In Tamaulipas, a small cartel cell, neither large nor prominent, was dismantled after a routine highway stop. The agents were surprised not by the weapons, nor the cash, nor the encrypted laptops. Those were expected. What caught their attention was the debrief binder found in the passenger seat. Printed pages, nothing digital. Each page a day. Each day a series of tasks. Rotate leadership chair at 1800 daily. Clean weapons in silence. Do not refer to names aloud. Sleep in shifts of 2 hours. If you fail, repeat. If you fail again, rotate out. No branding, no logos, no slang. Just procedure. Exactly like the Zeta manuals of 2007, Lazcano's golden age. One analyst later said, "The cell ran like a Swiss watch built by a ghost, because that's what he was now, the ghost in the wiring." Another case, this one even stranger, surfaced in 2028 near Ciudad Valles. During a raid on a remote communications outpost, agents uncovered a cache of cassette tapes, not digital files, cassettes, each marked with a number, nothing else. They were expecting narco corridos or coded threats. Instead, instructional voice recordings, spoken in a low, calm tone. Male, unidentifiable, not quite robotic, but carefully practiced. Each tape opened with a timestamp, then launched into lessons. Day 12. Movement without rhythm. Enter with your left shoulder. Keep hands visible. Close doors with your foot to avoid prints. Speak only in directives. Day 42. When preparing exit routes, leave one path deliberately vulnerable. It creates comfort. Then remove it. And so on. Tape after tape. Not philosophy, not strategy. Tactics. Tactics for disappearing. Analysts couldn't confirm whether the voice was Lazcano's, but what unsettled them was that no one in the compound seemed to recognize it either. The tapes were just part of the ritual, played at dawn, stored after dusk. Instructions followed. No questions asked. This wasn't nostalgia, it was discipline without origin. That's how deep his system ran. And it reached places no one expected. In 2029, a borderland shelter for trafficked migrants was found to have once been used as a Zeta staging house. The walls were repainted, furniture replaced, but under a loose floor tile, a sealed envelope was discovered. Inside, a single sheet of paper. The next time you walk in, walk out like you weren't born here. Was it a command? A message to the next operative? Or just something Lazcano had written for himself? Because if anyone mastered the art of leaving no legacy but pattern, it was him. He didn't name cities after himself. He left no succession plan, no heirs, only habits. That's how we end up here, chasing smoke through a hall of mirrors where every reflection walks like him, thinks like him, drills like him, but no one dares claim to be him. And maybe that's the most telling part, because in cartel culture, legacy is currency. Names are flaunted, bloodlines protected, stories shouted across parties and prisons alike. But not with Lazcano. With Lazcano, you don't boast. You nod. You sweep the floor in silence. You polish your weapon before sunrise. And when asked who taught you to do it that way, you just shrug, because you don't name the wind. You adjust to it. Many people still think he's out there, that some place exists where he watches quietly. Radio off, coffee hot, schedule memorized, waiting for a system that no longer needs him to acknowledge it one last time, but others think he's long gone. And the real brilliance? He designed for both. So what do you think? If the world forgets your name, but still obeys your rhythm, is that obscurity, or is it the purest kind of immortality? In the intelligence community, there's a term used sparingly: dead switch. It refers to a mechanism, often automated, that activates only if someone is gone. a final trigger, a fallback message, a last ripple. Many now suspect that Heriberto Lazcano was the dead switch. Not a man, not even a ghost, but a kind of coded sequence, activated not by his presence, but by his disappearance. You see it everywhere now, if you know where to look. In Sonora, a newly formed cartel offshoot, barely a year old, was caught operating with protocols eerily similar to those the Zetas used in 2008. But none of its members had ties to the old guard. No known former Zetas, no shared roots, no funding from legacy cells, and yet, same pacing, same encrypted paper codes, same absence of centralized leadership. When interrogated, one member said, "We were taught by a man who never told us his name." When asked why they trusted him, the reply was simple: because everything he told us worked. That's the Lazcano fingerprint, not in DNA or surveillance stills, but in results. Let's rewind for a moment. Think about how he trained people, not with promises, not with firebrand speeches or drug-laced loyalty pacts. He trained them with repetition, with clean boots, with the same quiet nod day after day, until it was more reflex than respect. His greatest act of leadership wasn't command, it was removal. In 2030, a cross-border operation stumbled onto what they believed to be an outdated Zeta archive hidden in a basement under a warehouse in Saltillo. Inside were hundreds of handwritten pages. No drugs, no money, just instructions. Page 1. Speak only in outcome. Page 4. Obedience without attribution is the highest form of discipline. Page 37. A ghost needs no name, only a door left open. And then, scribbled in the margins on page 59, if this is being read, I am no longer needed. Analysts still debate if the handwriting matches Lazcano's. But the message doesn't need attribution. It feels like him. Cold, final, designed to be found only when it no longer matters. Because that's the heart of the myth. Lazcano trained the world not to look for him. He trained it to move without him. One federal agent once joked, "It's like we were chasing a man who kept handing us his coat while he walked out the back door wearing ours." In 2031, a military raid in Chiapas uncovered another curiosity. A walled compound, empty, fortified, too clean to be abandoned, too lifeless to be occupied. No guards, no drugs, no weapons, just rooms arranged like barracks. Bunk beds with pressed sheets, a chalkboard with a list of duties, and in the kitchen, a worn cutting board, one clean knife, and a small stack of paperback novels. All war histories, dog-eared, not for show. In one of them, a folded slip of paper held a quote, "Power that can be traced is power that can be targeted." Another fingerprint, faint, strategic, and utterly consistent. Even now, law enforcement officials can't agree whether Lazcano is dead, retired, or simply reabsorbed into the mechanisms he built. Because if he's alive, he's living in the cracks, between jurisdictions, between profiles, between the seconds when nothing is happening, but everything is being decided. And if he's dead, his system hasn't noticed. One official in a joint DEA-FGR unit summed it up best. "We don't chase Lazcano anymore. We chase the parts of the world that still move like him, because they do move like him, in the way cartel lieutenants still time their radio silence with unspoken rhythms, in the way field agents still feel nervous when they enter a compound that's too organized, too quiet, too prepared, and in the way no one, no matter how deep they dig, has ever found a replacement. There is no new Lazcano, because Lazcano didn't build a throne, he built a vanishing point, and we are still staring into it. So what do you think? Can a man who trained others to forget him ever truly be gone? Or does he live in the very silence he taught them to leave behind? At this point, Even those tasked with solving the Heriberto Lazcano riddle have stopped asking where he is. That question expired years ago. Now, the better question is this. Does it matter? Because whether alive, buried, or watching from a sun-faded veranda somewhere beyond jurisdiction, Lazcano's design has outpaced his body. The machine he built no longer resembles its architect. It has evolved into something colder, smoother, and eerily automated. In 2031, during a multilateral symposium on transnational organized crime, a cybersecurity expert presented a troubling theory. The Zeta command structure under Lazcano has become fractal, self-replicating, not just surviving, learning. He clicked through slides showing intercepted communications, nodal supply maps, and algorithmic behavior curves. The movements, once believed to be human-led, now appeared programmatic. It's like someone installed a decision tree in real time, then stepped back. And behind all those decisions, each seemingly made by autonomous actors, there remained traces of one man's logic. Redundancy over ambition, silence over visibility, systems over successors. Still, skeptics abound. Many people still think the idea of Lazcano surviving is romanticized fiction. They say the silence means he's gone, that the structure is decaying, that those still invoking his name are grasping at ritual in the absence of real leadership. But even those skeptics can't explain what keeps happening. Like the ghost cell in Oaxaca, 5 men. No prior cartel history, no priors at all, no tattoos, no narcotic affiliations, but caught with a meticulously curated database of routes, ports, and safe house schematics, some of which hadn't been used since 2009. The kicker? They were practicing drills, alone, in uniform, matching down to boot shine and bunk layout. When questioned, none spoke, not out of fear, out of habit. That's Lazcano, through and through. He taught silence not as defense, but as identity, and it spread. Consider the case of the librarian in Merida, late 2031. A quiet man in his 60s is arrested while scanning vintage Zeta-era operational documents at a public archive. No ID, no criminal record, but in his satchel, diagrams, call signs, and a half-finished manuscript titled El Ritmo del Vacío, The Rhythm of the Void. It wasn't a biography, it was an instructional guide, how to build cells that don't require commanders, how to vanish from paper but not from impact. When asked why he was writing it, the man reportedly said, "So when I'm gone, it will keep going." That's what he taught us. He never named he. He didn't need to, because by now the name isn't important. It's the pattern. In 2032, cartel investigators began using a new category in their files: non-attributable behavioral echoes, cases where methods matched Lazcano's framework, but had no confirmed leadership, origin, or live communications. Echoes, repeats, ghosts of the operating system, and the numbers rising. These echoes don't make headlines. They don't do spectacular. They don't massacre, post videos, or threaten judges. They just operate, predictably, quietly, with one eye always on timing. And it's that last part, the timing, that haunts agents the most. One federal investigator admitted privately, "Every time a new cell surfaces with his rhythm, we ask ourselves, what if that's the warm-up? What if, after all these years, Lazcano isn't done? What if everything until now has been maintenance? Because every system eventually seeks reactivation. Every ghost, one way or another, needs a final word. So what would that look like? Not a video, not a shootout, probably not even a voice, just movement. 2 trucks in formation, a door left ajar, a routine that resumes without explanation, maybe a phrase etched in chalk, maybe a room arranged just so. No fanfare, just function. Because Lazcano, if he's out there, wouldn't return loudly. He'd return like power coming back after a blackout. Quiet, total, expected. So what do you think? Is it better for the world to finally confirm he's dead? Or is it better for him to remain what he's always been? A pause in the room that still makes people sit straighter. In the years since Heriberto Lazcano's supposed death, the world has learned to live with a strange kind of unfinished sentence. A name that doesn't conclude, a file that never quite closes, a shadow that stretches longer the less anyone turns to face it. But as 2033 unfolds, something begins to shift. Not a revelation, not a break in the case, but a return of cadence. In a quiet corner of San Luis Potosí, a failed arms drop draws attention. Not because of what was seized, standard equipment, tagged rifles, encrypted maps, but because of how it was arranged. The crates had been packed with white gloves, placed precisely, labels written in block caps with left-leaning slant, and each set of coordinates had been encoded using an old cipher format used by GAIF from 1999-2002, a format only one man had insisted on using long after it had been retired. Lazcano. This wasn't recycling, this was revival, and it wasn't just the packing. In the warehouse bathroom, drawn faintly with pencil on the back of a paper towel dispenser, agents found the phrase, "Mide dos veces, respira una, luego decide." Measure twice, breathe once, then decide. They took it down, ran tests, no DNA, no camera footage, nothing. But one agent refused to call it graffiti. He called it a signature, because here's what's becoming more apparent. If Lazcano is dead, then someone, or something, is deliberately carrying on not just his tactics, but his voice. Artificial intelligence analysts were brought in to study behavioral patterns across cartel factions. The goal? Identify anomalies. They expected chaos. They found design. One algorithm flagged a pattern of movements across 4 states: staggered fuel thefts, timed cross-border supply runs, coordinated diversions. None of the players knew each other. No communications linked them, and yet, each moved like a part of a greater plan. Same intervals, same fallback codes, same contingency decisions made with eerie precision. Too synchronized for coincidence, too quiet for command. It was as if someone had activated a standby protocol, the kind you set years ago, just in case. In fact, a theory now floats through the analyst community that Lazcano didn't fake his death to hide. He did it to test the endurance of his design. Think about that. What if his entire disappearance was the final field drill? A simulation run in real time, testing whether his soldiers, his system, could maintain discipline without a visible head. And the results? Disturbing. Because nearly a decade later, the rhythm still holds. His name may not be spoken anymore, but his rules remain. Obeyed not out of fear, not even out of tradition, but because they've become natural law in certain regions. The same way a hunter crouches by instinct, the same way a soldier falls silent when headlights crest a hill. It's built in now. One retired intelligence officer put it like this: he didn't want to be remembered. He wanted to be absorbed. And he was. So now we find ourselves looking not for the man, but for the operating system wearing new faces, new accents, new cover stories. Because while Lazcano himself remains missing in the bureaucratic sense, his movements continue, his signals repeat, his silences deepen. And then came the rumor. In early 2033, whispers began circulating about a voice message, a single sentence, broadcast once, on a frequency no longer monitored. 4 words: El ensayo terminó. Activar. The rehearsal is over. Activate. No voice confirmed, no source found. But the reaction was measurable. In 4 different cartel-linked territories, things moved. Personnel rotated. Routes shifted. Safe houses, long dormant, suddenly came online. It wasn't chaos. It was re-engagement. And yet, no visible leader emerged. No one took credit. No press, no songs, no flags. Just the system awakening. So what do you think? What if Heriberto Lazcano was never building an empire? What if he was building a clock? And now, without fanfare, without ceremony. That clock has simply begun to tick again. There's a particular kind of stillness that comes before something changes. Not silence exactly, but a kind of anticipation wrapped in ritual. That's where we are now, in 2034, across several intelligence briefings from Mexico City to Langley. One word has started to surface again in redacted corners of confidential memos. Not shouted, not discussed in open session, just underlined. Lazcano. But this time, not as a man, as a variable, a ghost key in a system no one wants to admit still functions. Because what happens when the machine you thought was broken begins operating again? Not in defiance, but in quiet alignment. What if the very absence of command has become the command? Let's step into the quietest part of this story now. There's a town near the Guatemalan border, unnamed for good reason, where a supply truck arrives every 17 days. It drops nothing, picks up nothing. The driver does not speak. He pulls in, waits for 7 minutes near a house with a green door, and then drives away. No one watches, no one interferes. Because for 12 years this has happened without fail. Locals call it el latido, the heartbeat. That rhythm? Classic Lazcano. Elsewhere, in 2034, drone footage over the Sierra Madre picked up something equally strange. An isolated compound that hadn't registered on satellite in years. And yet, from overhead, it looked kept, maintained, grass trimmed, bunk roofs intact, generator wiring, new, no guards, just presence. When special operations teams approached, the site was, predictably, abandoned. No heat, no motion, no power, but under a cot in the southeast corner, one item had been deliberately left behind. A metronome, ticking, not fast, not loud, just steady, and on its wooden base, burned into the grain. Repeat sin pensar, repeat without thought. It wasn't a message for outsiders. It was a reminder for insiders, because Lazcano didn't train men to follow him. He trained them to follow timing, the rhythm that replaces identity. That makes hierarchy obsolete. That endures. That's the word you keep hearing now among analysts who never use words loosely. Endured. His rules endured. His structure endured. And maybe, just maybe, he endured. But not in the way you think. Not as a man in hiding, or a king in exile, or a relic in the jungle. As a code base. A set of operational principles too lean to rot. Too quiet to age. Too deeply embedded to remove. One last moment then. In mid-2034, an internal report from a South American intelligence network documented a previously unknown compound deep in the Bolivian highlands. Cameras were deployed, monitors watched. For 6 days, nothing. On day 7, a figure emerged. Elderly, measured, wearing plain clothes, a watch face turned inward. No guards, no phone. He walked to a small radio antenna, adjusted it, looked west for a long moment. Then he turned back inside. The footage was grainy, the face indistinct, but those watching from multiple governments stopped speaking. They just watched, and one analyst, young and unsure, asked, "Is that him?" The room went quiet. No one answered, because maybe it was, or maybe it didn't matter, because everything else already is. So what do you think? Was Heriberto Lazcano ever a man at all? Or has he become something else entirely? A rhythm that survives the silence. A breath held in permanent rotation. A ghost that trained the living to move without needing the dead. And now, with our journey at its quiet end, let the story dim with the same care it unfolded. Picture this. A room long abandoned but freshly swept. A bootlace tied with practiced hands. A chair turned slightly toward a window where nothing ever passes. But still, someone checks. Outside, the world spins. Loud, hungry, restless. But in here, in the hush that clings to discipline, there's a calmness built not from peace, but from structure. Because Heriberto Lazcano didn't vanish in chaos. He vanished by design. And as you settle into your own kind of quiet now, maybe you can feel the same rhythm beneath your breathing. Not urgency, not tension, just repetition, measured, intentional, lightless. Let your breath mirror his system, steady, unbroken, soft. Let the light stay low, the air unmoving. Because in a world loud with noise and names, the quietest man sometimes leaves the longest trail. You don't need to remember every detail, just the feeling of footsteps that never echoed, of orders that needed no voice, of a man who may have never truly existed the way we thought, but left us somehow following his lead anyway. And now, with nothing left to decode, nothing left to pursue,